Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here on the FIS initiative, taking part on this panel addressing a theme that is very relevant in healthcare. I have Fernando Santiago with me, a partner at Chenud Santiago Oliveira and a member of the CNPD, and a colleague, Valter, which is technology projects manager at the Santa Casa in Rio Preto. So the GDPR theme is very important in healthcare. It was enacted in 2018 and it became effective as of 2020. And its administrative sanctions gained effect in August this year. And when we go to the healthcare industry, healthcare managers that have been, and I always interact with them, and they said to me, what now? Am I ready for this? What do I have to do? And what happens today in the country as a whole is that we always leave it till the last minute. And so we have a few insights here that are important to say, which is the GDPR is here to stay, and we need to be ready for that. And when we talk about GDPR, it's not just about the system that companies have. Now I'm going to implement data rules in the system, and a software provider told me that I am ready, that it's okay, that there's no risk, that my data is protected. What about the other issues related to the healthcare facility? How do you register all the visitors that you had, that the doorman writes down on a piece of paper what are data of visitors that go into the rooms, patients that oftentimes nurses and other professionals do not have a digital information. So with this and other issues that we are going to work on this, it's important to say that the GDPR, there is not one size fits all. There's no recipe. So for each organization, you need to understand which measures need to be taken, understand the law, and the process that they need to work on regarding the aspects to complying with the law, to then take measures and actions so that they are not exposed to the risk of administrative and legal sanctions. Then I'm going to give the floor to Fernando Santiago, and Fernando Santiago has some experience in a GDPR. So the European LGPD, which is the GDPR. So the Brazilian LGPD is here. So what should I do? What now? How difficult is it to make it effective, and how much can it impact a healthcare organization as a whole? Excellent question, Rogério. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with you, with Valter and you, and talking to people who are so interesting and interested in this theme. Sometimes looks scary, sometimes not so much. So you said in a very appropriate way, so the LGPD is here already. It's now. What should we do? What is the risk? How should things happen? And as you have explained very clearly, we are aware that companies leave everything to the last minute, and this is natural. This is not a feature that is unique to Brazil. I also work in Europe, and then I have been working between Europe and Brazil for many years, and I lived in Europe. And then I had experience with the GDPR in Europe. And so within that context, what I had the opportunity to witness back then in France, this is where I practiced law, and in Brazil, there are huge similarities. So which somehow gives us a vision of what will be the next consequences of this theme in Brazil. Once the LGPD gains effect in Brazil, and it's a challenge for all companies in all industries, so that are, and we know that in healthcare there are philanthropic organizations, not-for-profit organizations, a few entities that are organized slightly different than a company. The challenge is the same and the difficulty is the same, but the way to address it's the same. The first step is to understand. So I should draw, I always draw a parallel whenever I have to explain it, and it might help you to understand the dilemma. Well, I related to accounting. Let's imagine there is no accounting, such as in Dubai. Dubai, there is no accounting. Each one does the cash and all the financial records, depending on their personal history, their beliefs, sensitivities, and etc. And one day there is a law that says, well, now there is accounting. Whatever you thought was reasonable and to be, if you want to, deductible will have to be different, profit is different, something you call raw materials or inputs should be classified here and there. So with LGPD, it's the same thing happens. We did not have a rule on terms of the protection of personal data in Brazil. Each one treated the personal data depending on their conviction, sensitivity. Maybe those who value the most the personal data were marketing to send a mailing list or billing or something. And that's it. And then one day, someone says this personal data should go into this box, the other one go into another box. You need to do a number of things that you didn't do before. And this implies major changes, and changes are difficult and complex to be implemented. And the the LGPD deeply affects all organizations. So, presenting a brief overview, the company's governance is going to be affected. So sometimes you need to modify or reflect about your practices, code of conduct, organizational ethics, sometimes even the bylaws, the organization of the company, positions, roles, and responsibilities. You need to create a VPO or CPO or a privacy department. And then every company will all need to incorporate competencies on the law that didn't used to we didn't used to need to have that before. We need to bring this competence through consulting or hiring someone. So all of this is going to be affected. Technology, no one better than you can tell us a little bit about the impacts of technology, as you have just mentioned, about anonymity and everything else. Incentives is something that sometimes is neglected, and we need to create incentives for each department to reach a certain degree of compliance. And in talking about incentives, we may think of sanctions on the other end for an employee that does not comply with all the rules, because there is a very high risk in organizations because of the LGPD. Systems, processes that need to be changed. So you might need to have a consent in a process that did not have a consent before. You need to change your processes. Also, your business strategy may be affected, the way you use information from competitors, from the market, from the audience, and maybe even business models, the way you monetize your business and might be affected by the LGPD. And this is just an illustration of the challenge. The challenge is in fact significant for companies, and this is not necessarily so simple. We have a lot of work ahead of us to build awareness, and especially for them to understand where the impacts are, to then start addressing. It's a slow process. There is no magic bullet. And so no one, well, do you agree with LPGD? Are you compliant? And that's it. It's a continuing project. It's ongoing. It's not just, it needs to stop being a project, and it needs to become a program. And if you don't do that, it will fail. Okay, Fernando, thank you very much for the explanation. I think it's really fundamental that there are many aspects that need to be assessed for people to comply with the LGPD. Now, I would like to give the floor to Valter. He comes from the customer side, from a healthcare organization. So the LGPD is here, here we are, and so what? How can we comply with it? What are the difficulties and impacts on a healthcare organization, in your case, a hospital, to comply with the general law for the protection of data? So here we are a Santa Casa. A Santa Casa has many unique features. It's a hospital that has not one owner. It's a philanthropic. So there is an election, there's an advisory board. It's a little bit more complicated than a private hospital. So number one, so how do we do this here? How do we deal with the LGPD? Well, the LGPD needs to be seen through this way, not as a problem, but as an opportunity. Because every hospital, as you said, once you arrive at the gate, someone will write down your name, your ID number, and a picture. And where is that piece of paper? How is it done? Until now, everyone believed that they were doing the best thing or the ideal. But are we really? Probably we aren't. We can always improve processes. And as Fernando said, this is not just one action. It's a continuing, ongoing process of improvement that needs to be seen in a certain way. You need to do it the first time. You need to identify the critical points at first, the points that affect the most. And so that little piece of paper at the gate, where is it? Where do you keep it? So that we get to the end. So let's see the patient record. So who can have access to the record? Today, one thing in hospitals, IT people in a hospital, can they see a medical record? No, they cannot have access. They're not allowed. So the system supporting a hospital need to comply with all those rules. And we are undergoing changes. And this change of the whole hospital system, we are using it to redesign all processes, identifying all data that are collected in each phase, and also defining who are the operators in the LGPD that can have access to the data, and trying to use it. So basic antivirus, which antivirus is used. So backup sometimes is online, it can be hacked or not. So there are many points that need to be taken into consideration. And LGPD is not one system or one action. There are some people selling that. And if they try to sell us, let's buy the LGPD. Well, you can buy it. You can buy it. This is just a set of rules. So you can't really buy it from anywhere. You need to have orientation in order to do that in compliance with the law. I'm no lawyer, and you need to have someone providing support to you based on the law so that you comply with all requirements of the law. And this is a fundamental aspect. Who needs to buy that? How are you going to solve it? This is to the hospital provider. They will make the decision. And if they find that is just do it in order to meet the needs, this is nothing is going to happen. No, you're wrong. It needs to be seen as an opportunity for improvement. And in my opinion, this is the fundamental step of today's LGPD. It's a great opportunity, not a big problem, as many people are seeing it. Well, nice, Valter. That's for sure. You were very fortunate in touching the issue of opportunity. And this is not a recipe that we can sell. It's a concept, good practices that companies need to comply with. And then, mm, as for as far as I know, in terms of the law, you need to comply with everything, with all the information of its employees and patients, and this is all very clear. Now, getting to the bias that really takes me to LGPDs as digital data and safety. And then it's very important for each organization to really pay close attention to the vendors that are selling solutions for the LGPD. Like Valter said, someone called me and was trying to sell LGPD. Well, that doesn't exist. And you need to get a system solution which is compliant with LGPD and the system. And then I can say from what we are developing here at Totvs,
this concept is inserted into the framework. It's not actually intrinsic to healthcare. It's actually interesting to all segments. The developer, when they develop a feature in terms of clinical record, patient history, they do not have independence to change the information within the development framework in the platform. They're developing that of doing things that are not going to, or that are not in agreement to what the GDPR, or the General Data Protection Law, envisages. So the company is co-responsible regarding certain things regarding the law, and extrapolating the aspect of the law. We see physical data aspects on the day-to-day in the institution. So as I said, you have the hospitalization of patients, and you have several aspects. And from what we've seen in the law in August, what certain administrative sanctions were put in effect. And I ask you, Fernando, how does it work? What is the risk for an institution if there is a penalty? How should they proceed if they are at risk in this sense? What can you advise institutions if there is some data leak, some data sequestration in that? How should they act in this case today? Well, first of all, let me make a little remark, if you allow me. I'm very pleased to hear you, Walter, especially on the fact that the law is our GDPR is an opportunity. So we make this comparison. So the GDPR or our GDP, depending on the way you use it, it's being seen as an excellent opportunity for companies and philanthropic organizations of renewing the relationship and the communication with clients. An excellent opportunity for that is to say, clients or patients, we worry about your data, your privacy, and we are then making or taking several actions to preserve your data. And this has been seen as an opportunity for some. I was quite happy to hear you talk about this. So let me close this little remark. And going back to the topic you've asked me, so what the company should do when there is a problem or something of this nature. The first reflexes are quite simple. It is hard for me to talk about the problem generically once each problem is specific regarding the previous situation and the future. There is no predictability. But you brought up the question of data leakage, malware, etc. So the first thing is to, well, keep your mind in its place, and take the necessary steps. So you have to an incident response plan. So if something happened, what do you do? Who are you going to call upon? So there are certain people that think you have 3 solutions for that. Either you go to the church, you call the police, or you unplug it. You have 3 solutions for that. So the advice is to reflect regarding the scenario. Who are you going to call upon? What are the measures you may take to mitigate such type of event? This during planning. So say you've gone through planning or something that has not happened. What does a company have to do? The only point I can give you as sort of a general rule of thumb in terms of conduct is transparency. This point, I know it is never simple for a company to admit that there has been data leakage within its structure or some malware, or they lost data, or the client's data has been accessed by those that were not entitled. It's always hard to say that it gives the impression that you haven't taken care of something you should have. And we know that this is not always true. You may have taken good care of the database. We see it all the time. Hackers invade the Pentagon, Microsoft. They won't go into your company, or they won't hack into a company. We should be humble regarding this kind of situation. The second point is analyzing actually the risks that may happen because of these things. There are various risks. So you have legal risks. So we can break them down into legal regarding the holder. Can the holder ask for some kind of compensation? Can they complain, etc.? And risks in this area of legal risks. Can the general attorney's ministry criticize that? The National Authority of Data Protection can go against me. We're going to assess the likelihood and what we do to mitigate issues. In all those scenarios I've mentioned to you, that's why I insist that the only guiding line or backbone that will guide these scenarios is transparency. This is seen as an element to attenuate the sanctions of LGPD, because regarding holders, if you try to hide that, and this is found out later, this may be even more severe than actually reporting it and explaining to people what has happened. So I've mentioned legal risk, but there are several other risks in your area of technology. For example, risks related to data. You may lose the data. Data may be available to third parties or not. You may recover them, have a backup, etc. So all of this, I tell you, based on my experience, this is my experience as a lawyer in personal data protection. This is extremely stressful and extremely complex to deal with in such type of situation that has not been prepared for this event, because we don't know who are the intermediaries, who are we going to talk to, what should be communicated. You run the risk of in a structure, you have a director that says something in a sense, and the other staff member that says something that has a different tone, and then the press says it even differently. So what I may say regarding this topic are actually two lines. The first I've mentioned, transparency, and the second, preparing and anticipating, which is, I believe, the best path to deal with this kind of situation that one day will happen. When it happens, it's going to happen. It's just anticipation in this context is quite important. Thank you, Fernando. You brought topics that are quite important, because today, fortunately, as you've mentioned, the Pentagon was hacked, So this is a reality that sooner or later, no matter how safe we are vulnerable to that. And even a point I'd like to bring up within technology is, in addition to, the healthcare institution, this is for Rogério as a technology professional, in addition to having a sensible choice of your software provider that provides a solution that is totally compliant to the LGPD rules, it's important for you to create an ecosystem of technological infrastructure. Be it at home, you can create your data center in a very robust way using firewalls, using safety mechanisms, backup mechanisms, and security mechanisms. If you have a data captured by outside, you can have if you have backup system, you don't need to rescue that. You rescue the backup and life goes on, and you improve your procedures, and that's it. For you to be able to know, I would even recommend a company that can have a situation, have a cloud that is more safe in terms of data management with privacy policies, security, backup policies, disaster recovery policies. This is fundamental for you to know. This is fundamental for you. The companies have to think about, people have to be professional. So we have this security of patients. This is a business. This is your business. So if you take a company that have their data kidnapped, so you stop. We had some labs in Brazil. They had that. We have an example giving a context worldwide. So Garmin, the company, so you have your trainings and you download. So Garmin was out for 2 weeks. So they were out, disconnected for 2 weeks. And people say that they paid $1 million to see. You see how much we are vulnerable to that. So we have technology or information technology with security. So you have a provider that can provide that. It's necessary regardless of LGPD. So the security is totally necessary regardless of the law. I'm going to change the point of view a bit. So I'm going to bring the bias of the past 2 years, so to speak, a year and a half. On the pandemic, I usually say that healthcare, well, in technology for healthcare and digitization for healthcare, we've evolved 5 years in one. Obviously, when we work in digitization, we're more vulnerable to digital data. I'm going to ask Valter an explanation. How has the pandemic been like? Thank goodness we're leaving the pandemic. Things are getting back to normal. What was your life like during the pandemic? Give us a brief report to us. Okay, the pandemic has been chaos. Literally, to us in the hospital, working in the environment of great risk, because we are the city's hospital. We serve the public health system in the city, and we have another hospital in the region. So it's been very, very serious, as you said. It's been a great opportunity, once again, for us to be able to improve processes of external access, of security. It's not that we are flawless, as you've seen. The Pentagon has been hacked. So are we going to be here? Totally. So I do not have this hope, actually. And as you've said, it is something that everybody talks about, the law, the GDPR. People talk about systems. Systems are very important. So it has to be compliant and a system that supports us. But you have a past of our Santa Casa, 20 years on paper. Where is that? Well, this is not our own privilege here in São José do Rio Preto. All other hospitals must have a liability on paper that is very big. And where is it? A lot of people say that, okay, fire, cool. If people forget about water and there is a leak, a pipe in a house, a roof, who's looking into that? That has to be paid attention to. So that's where we started here. We started with paper here, and it's been a year almost, right, Rogério? We've been implementing and replacing all the systems for the hospital to try to have a single system to ensure that and not have a patchwork, have 1, 2, 3 systems so that we can integrate that. Once you have a system integration, you're more subject to vulnerabilities because the system has it. So is this conversion on the system and you make the conversion via text file? Okay, so your information is totally open. So as Fernando said, systems have to be transparent. Everything you do has to be transparent. Everything you want to avoid, you have to plan. And this law, LGPD, is continuous planning. So the pandemic is arrived and has ended up helping us greatly. It's forced us. It's not that we wanted that, because we really wanted it. It was free and spontaneous pressure so that we can move towards solutions that could meet the demands. Very good, Wagner. Your approach is quite interesting. And data, physical data, fundamental. So many times we don't remember. Many times in health, we need to keep the data for a long time. So patient data, 20 years. Yeah, 20 years. It's a lot. Wow. And the responsibility is huge.
Now, mentioning a bias even to Fernando. Fernando is member of the National Council of Data Protection. So tell us a little bit about the role of CNPD and how do these agencies related to data protection work? So NPD is a National Authority of Data Protection. So this is equivalent, it's like a regulator, equivalent to a regulating agency, although it doesn't have the same legal status. And I'm going to talk about functional aspects. Its role is to regulate personal data in Brazil and even overseas if it's Brazilian data. Sometimes it can go beyond the Brazilian territory. Now, focusing about Brazil, it's a regulating agency. Just as ANEEL is for energy, Anatel is for telecommunications, and so on and so forth. The unique feature of ANPD is that its action is cross-section. It doesn't regulate one economic sector just as Anvisa regulates most of our listeners here. It regulates how we manage personal data. This is very wide-ranging because any organization, whether it is for-profit or not, regardless of the way they are organized as a company, legally speaking, if they have one employee or no customers, so they have personal data and they are subject to ANPD. So it was also defined by the CNPDs, the National Council of Data Privacy, and I am one of the persons, I am a representative of the lower house in that organization. It defines the guidelines for the action of ANPD, such as designing and helping to direct the national policy for personal data protection. All of this is very new. As a coincidence, we have had our first work meeting just yesterday. And this is all going to evolve over the next few months greatly, in order to create a system of standards to deal with personal data in Brazil. Once again, as there was no accounting, which are the standards or the rules to be applied? And then we need to report these standards to the market. We need to teach people on how to deal with that. And there are major challenges in healthcare. I have been working a lot with healthcare. I work very much pharmaceutical industry. It's an industry that is very dear to me in my professional activity. And there are many challenges which are practically impossible to be addressed just by issuing a rule. And the idea of health data. We know that the health data is sensitive. So the LGPD, there's the usual data and there are some sensitive data. sensitive data, as the law says. They are data that requires a little bit more care and attention in managing. And in the category of sensitive personal data, health-related data. What is that? We don't know. There is no definition. It's impossible to define it. Let me give you an example. So we are dealing with hospitals. Well, Valter is here. Obviously, a medical record is a health-related data. Prescription, same thing. But there are data in a gray zone. For example, well-being. So Fernando has been sad lately. Fernando has been said, is that a health-related or performance? And so performance. Rogério can run 10 kilometers in 1 hour, and then Rogério is running 10 kilometers in 1 hour and a half, and then in 2 hours. So what? Is that a health-related information? So what we call health-related data, not in nature, but due to destination. So maybe with that information combined with something else, you would be able to extract information about the health status of that person. I don't want to scare anyone watching us. I'm just trying to create some controversy. We're getting to a level of sophisticated that is just a little bit more advanced in terms of the discussion in Brazil, but just to show you a little bit of the difficulties and challenges that we have that are impossible to be addressed by just you publishing a rule. It's impossible to think of all these situations. So I think there will be a construction of decisions, manifestations, and so on and so forth that will help us define a little bit of this horizon, especially for us working in healthcare. Very nice, Fernando. Very interesting what you have mentioned. And these are things that we don't even think. We think that it's just information that are in the medical record and their record. They are already there, but this goes way beyond. It's related to aspects in our lives that we don't even imagine. But I think that we are in good hands. People with your experience and knowledge, I think that we are going to get to a very interesting place. Now we are getting to the final part of our debate. And now, for the final part, I would like to ask Valter to talk to us for 2 minutes. If you could give a hint for those who are listening to us, in 2 minutes, which are the first steps that an organization needs to consider a priority to comply with LGPD? Well, so start doing something good. Forget the great. And so you have a system, you have your technology environment, you have backup call, your system crashes, and then you go back. Where is your backup? Until you restore your environment, you waste a lot of time. So backup is very important, yes, to keep data, but having a second environment, a disaster recovery site can be together, but then I need to find another place. No, that's good. Forget the great. So it needs to be good enough. Think of that point. Start from what is simple. Do not worry about data, digital certification integrated to the system. Start doing, map your data. Start with the mapping, your information flow, and who has access and why those people need to have access. Be transparent. Great, Walter. Good hints. What about you, Fernando? Thinking of a professional that knows in depth. And then we see the LGPD. And then I have been working with personal data protection and I am a lawyer, and I used to practice law in Europe. But interesting, there is absolutely nothing to do with any technical aspect with the LGPD or the law. It regards two elements which to me are essential. Do not waste any time. Number one, implication of senior management. If senior management is not aware of what we are talking about, of its importance to invest energy in a project, it's not worthwhile. Money is going to go wasted and they're just going to stop doing things. Number two, which is almost a continuation of the first one, is that you should provide for a minimal structure to continue actions. Of course, Valter mentioned, and so know your data where it is. Well, yes, this is the basics and the first step. He's absolutely right. But what I have been seeing in the market are many companies and organizations that go there, do their mapping, invest in time and energy, but after a certain time, they have a report, and then they get on a day-to-day, get into the routine, and starts going down and down and down, and everything that was done is just not implemented. So unless there is continuity in these processes and the will to implement changes, LGPD will not going to be implemented. I'm sorry if you were hoping to have something very technical and complex, but this is not the result of my experience.
Not at all. We have to base it on the simple and to have actually sponsorship within the organization. With no engagement, it doesn't happen. You've been quite assertive in your comments. We're going to wrap up our panel on the GDPR. I'd like to thank Fernando, Walter, and everyone that participated in our discussion. Thank you all very much. I wish you all a very good end of afternoon and an excellent event. Thank you all very much.